Thanks very much, Grant, and thanks very much for having me along. So, what I want to do this evening, really, at the moment, my primary job, I'm a research fellow at Bath Spa University, but I'm mainly working for Khwa Museum, which is Khwa is a San culture and education training centre, so the San and the Bushmen. So I'm using those two words together. I don't know how much you know about the Bushmen. I know I've talked to probably quite a few of you about it before, and it's obviously familiar territory.
Well, not necessarily, not everybody.
No.
Tell what.
So what I'm going to do is, what I'd like to do is tell you about the museum, because I'm extremely lucky that I was asked to put together a museum for these hunter-gatherer peoples who live in southern Africa. And it's an extraordinary opportunity. There isn't a museum like this, certainly not for the San, for the Bushmen, and even for hunter-gatherers. There are big sort of hunter-gatherer museums with hunter-gatherers in them around the world. But this, I think, what we're trying to do is something a little bit different. So for me, it'd be great to just share all the ideas that I've been working with, and feel your responses, your questions. Because I'm literally in the process of saying, well, what do we do? How do we do this? Is it going to work? So what I've got is 3 PowerPoints here. And one of them, the first one, is just a recap of who the Bushmen are, who the San are, just so that we're sort of all on the same page. And then I've got 2 more. Now, one of them is the last PowerPoint that I showed to the committee at Khwa. And I've edited it a little bit to just cut it down and make it a bit tighter. But I think it also shows the process that I'm going through. I mean, I've never made a museum before. I'm an academic otherwise. So it's a big learning curve for me. And I'm trying to come up with the ideas and run people through them, explore them. And I'm in the strange position where the museum is for the San, but everything, it's meant to be in the voice of the San. But of course, they're not familiar with museums. The whole idea of hunter-gatherers and museums doesn't really knit together terribly well. Sticking people who spend their whole times outside in a completely different intellectual, social environment, and then you stuff them in this great Western invention. It's a difficult thing, so that's one of the primary challenges. So I'm going to show a PowerPoint of my plans for the museum and outline the museum. I'm also going to show a PowerPoint of one of the sessions I had with the working group that I have of San, of the Bushmen, at the museum. So we have about 20 people from different groups of Bushmen who we sit down and we try and flesh out what we're actually going to say, whose voice we're using for what's important, what isn't. And there are a few difficulties in this whole process. And those are the challenges that I want to share with you, and see where we can go with them. So, first of all, just to put things in perspective. So the idea of the Bushmen, it's an idea. Obviously, people living in southern Africa, people who live up in the Angola border, people who live down by the Cape. There's no reason why they should know that they're related. What makes them related? So people have come in, Western people, observers, ethnographers, and they said, yes, you speak a similar language, you look the same, you whatever. So we feel you are the same people. Now, of course, Western people have one idea, because they've got their own history of going in and finding these groups of people. Japanese researchers have got another idea. They're very big, working with the San. So it's an idea of who the Bushmen are. But it's the idea that we're working with all the time, because now the dominant feedback almost to the San about who they are comes from what's going on in the rest of the world. And of course they are thoroughly integrated in the rest of the world, although they're relatively remote regions they live in. So the perspective is that 1488, the first time someone arrives down on the coast of South Africa, and they find people there, and the significant thing that they say is, well, they're herders. They have either sheep or cattle. Sheep, they think, were there 2,000 years ago, roughly. Cattle, maybe 1,000 years ago. So when people arrived in 1488, there were people there with something useful. They had sheep, probably. And that's an important factor. Then, 9 years later, someone else turns up, Vasco da Gama, He says, well, no, there are just these people foraging, not so useful, but the Cape is a very useful point for stopping off on the way to the east, trading. So the Dutch East India Company want to restock their supplies there. They want to use it as a place for leaving messages, mail under rocks, for passing ships. So they build a supply station there, and the most important thing for them is their water, is their food. So very significant, livestock and no livestock. And Jan van Riebeek, commander of the Dutch Cape settlement, he's credited as one of the first people of coming to some sort of distinction about who the Bushmen are or aren't. And he said, well, there are either two sorts of people here: there are keepers of livestock or robbers of livestock. So again, use. Are these people useful? What's going on? That's what they're after. And then this is a quote from the archive, 1655. If you look at this quote, the way it's framed: small, meagre, wild, without huts, without cattle or anything in the world. So this is a framing that was used. It's credited as Herodotus coming up with it in his histories, saying that yes, these are people that we meet and they haven't got this, they haven't got this, they haven't got this. So automatically you're framing them in this sort of this negative mirror of everything that's valuable and everything that you work towards, and later ideas of progress and so forth. Straight away, that's where the San, the Bushmen, sit. So just a couple of illustrations. Those are the sorts of things that were coming out from 1700, that one from 1800. So interesting details, very stylized. Then in the late 19th century, a Prussian philologist went out to discover the origins of language amongst the Zulu. He decided that the Bushmen were more interesting than the Zulu. So he switched over and then thought, well, maybe folklore's more interesting than the origins of language, although he sort of kept all his interests going. And he, hugely influential with his daughter, his sister-in-law, Lucy Lloyd, and they created a tremendous archive of primarily folklore and beliefs about a group called the Tram Bushmen, who lived in South Africa. But the critical thing is 1875, he's saying, you can't read it, unfortunately, but he basically says, we are here to capture the primitive mind before it disappears. There's change happening so fast that we've got to capture this mind and it's going to disappear. Now people have been saying this probably for 100 years, 150 years before him, but that sort of period, people were very aware of the changes going on in the Cape.
I just asked, when did the name San originate? And who was it that gave it that name?
Yeah, I mean, the naming is it's a complex thing. It is a long debate. When people first arrived there, they started writing khwa, I think was the first thing that they said. And then it's gone through permutations. The Dutch said bossy men, bushmen. The word San came in much, much later. It was a political movement that brought the word San in. Probably S-A-N. Well, actually, it should be San. But people don't tend to write that.
Two A's, maybe.
Well, yes, two A's would be the best way, rather than a macron. But yes, that came in probably in the last 20 years or so. A lot of groups got together and decided they needed a name that wasn't derogatory, and they considered Bushmen derogatory. About 25 years. But then there's been a whole circle where Bushman has been ennobled and San has been, it means to pick up. So to pick up herbs, sa is picking up in Khoikhoi. So it's only one of the languages that they speak. So it's not representative, it's been politically introduced. So here we have a couple of books that are very recent, and the message of these books, unfortunately again you can't read it, this guy, Paul Myberg, The Bushman Winter Has Come, basically saying I spent 7 years living with the Bushmen, the last Bushmen there are, and they're leaving the desert, and that's it, it's all over. Civilization has wiped them out, but I was there, and I've written it all down for you. Now, maybe. It's not quite what I heard about what Paul got up to, and how long he stayed there, but I wouldn't like to say that publicly. But it's this message of they're all disappearing, they're the last remnants, ancient peoples. Another book written by Patricia Glynn, who's a well-known, I think she was a journalist in South Africa. And I was there when Patricia Glynn was doing her research for this amongst the Khumani Bushmen in South Africa, the north of South Africa. And again, this, unfortunately, again, I think you can read it, but it basically is a quote from David Kraper, who was the leader of that little Bushman group, the Kraper family. And he basically says, look, I'm going to tell you my secrets. Before I die, you're going to be the last person that hears my secrets about the past. And I'm going to take you into the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, the desert where we used to live, and reveal my secrets. So again, it's the same thing of the white person comes in and they're told that last little glimmer of hope, and I've got it, and now it's all gone, and this is what it's all about. Of course, it's a load of drink. But I know these guys well. David Kraper's dead now. This was a line that was worked every time. And I realised it was worked on me after 5 years. This is where I stood, and this is where I leant up against the fence, and I looked out when I was young, as I was born in the park. But before I was born, I used to live over there on the farm. Yes? Well, yeah, so I was brought up in the park, but I lived on the farm, and we sat in. You get to think, well, okay, what's so great about leaning on the fence and looking at the park? This isn't gold dust being thrown at me. You're a human being with nice stories, great, but we're not finding some, eternal truths, which is not denigrating them as people or what they've got to say. Marvellous things they've got to say, great people, but it's not what's going on here. Which isn't to say, these aren't good books, good reads with some valuable things in them.
So, sorry, why were they saying them to you? Why do they tell people these stories?
It's a business. They are savvy, they're sharp, they love it, and they're raconteurs.
And they see you as a tourist, I suppose.
They're so used to researchers and tourists coming through. It's how they've grown up. For their whole lives. If they're not doing that, they're selling things to tourists by the side of the road. They're selling things to funders coming in. This funder's going to give us loads of money. Put on a good show. That's actually what happens. So you put on a good show. And, Mama, yes, Mama, yes. And I think I told the story about that last time. And it's I don't blame them. That's partly what they're good at. They're good at surviving.
Yeah.
They're good at working with people. They're good at foraging their ways through society. This is why they haven't disappeared. I mean, there have been epidemics. There have been terrible commando operations against them, annihilations, genocide perhaps, but they haven't disappeared. Proof they haven't disappeared, 113,000 of them are still living. This is roughly where they live. There's probably a few people whose identity doesn't quite fit the mould, that are outside that, but that's the basic parameters of where they live. And the groups where I've worked through Namibia, through the Jintwazi, with the Naro, with the Khumani, a little bit with the Khwa right up there. So those are the major groups. So, how long have they been there? Well, archaeologists are writing that they've been there maybe 20,000 years, but of course, how do you define Bushmen have been there, or hunter-gatherers have been there? I'm not quite sure how you make that distinction. The big thing, which is obviously the title of the talk, First People, is that with genetic research that's coming out, or has been going on now for a long while, the Bushmen are meant to be the most genetically diverse people in the world, which means that they are the group closest to the group from which we all sprang. So this has caused an enormous amount of attention. I mean, this research gets very complicated and keeps changing the whole time. And every time you read a paper on it, it's someone else is coming out. I read one the other day, and they were saying, well, yes, it's very well. You've got to be very careful choosing which Bushman group, because this group, in fact, are showing genes that are from a group of farmers in the East, and that's only changed within the last 1,000, 2,000 years, or 500 years maybe. So there's a big claim to the past, and that's also a big part of our museum, a big part of their identity. So most groups have a history of hunting and gathering. Most San families are small in size. Their parents plus 2 or 3 children is a family group. They live in groups or bands, to use that nice anthropological word, 25 to 50 people living together, linked through kinship, marriage and friendship. Bands lived in large groups, and they see themselves as sharing traditions, culture, history and associations with land and with each other. Today most San live in villages of about 100 to 500 people. And those villages tend to be, they have all sorts of other people who come in. In Namibia you have Herero, you have Avambo. On the borders of Botswana you have Humbukushu. You have lots of people moving into the areas. They tend to be the people who are at the lowest, and always have been, at the lowest margins of society. So they're discriminated against, they're disenfranchised, the children struggle at school because the school teachers aren't from the San communities. They have the lowest income, if any income at all. So pretty desperate times for a lot of them. A lot of alcohol problems, malaria is a problem, HIV is a problem, tuberculosis. Healthcare is improving, but these are very significant problems still. Just a quick picture of the sorts of people we're talking about. These are Haikon on a farm. These are Komani Bushmen from South Africa. This is a khwa Bushman from Namibia. These are a couple of guys, you ask them to go hunting and they put their stuff on and out they go. Unfortunately he's dead now. He was stabbed by a friend after too much Guinness. Ladies in Khanzi making ostrich eggshell jewellery, Humbukushu cattle station where the Bushmen go and work and help with the cattle. So the other thing that Bushmen are famous for is the Bushman healing dance, and this has been significant really because it's their most obvious and perhaps even their only ritual in some senses, but it's been associated with rock art, and this has been a big thing in the world of archaeology. So you get these dancing images. These are images of people dancing around. I talked about this last time with sharing what's known as supernatural potency, being fired in arrows, and people bleeding, so there's blood coming out of a shaman who's turned into an animal. But this has been very influential in the rock art world. Other aspects of their rock art, I mean, it's one of the primary rock art regions of the world, Southern Africa. Hunting figures, eland, and then carvings in rocks. And there's been a lot of discussion about what these carvings are. It's a little bit hard to see, unfortunately, but Driekops eland, it's a granite slab that's got these, they call them entoptics. They're meant to be shapes that we all see if we get into an altered state of consciousness. Again, there's some controversy around it, but it's been very influential for interpretation of rock art around the world. So that's the first one I want to show you. That's my beautiful family. Gosh, it's all rearranged. Right, so this is at the museum. See, somehow my task is to try and give, well, it almost sounds paternalistic again, give them a voice. We want to mobilise and empower so that they can say what they want to say in their own way. And this is what we're heading out to do. You know, we're not the first people to do that. Obviously, it's been going on very prominently in America, North America, places like the Museum of the Native American Indian in Washington, the Smithsonian. This was their big thing, giving a voice, the native voice. So I'll just skip through that, the phases we're going through. So this was the subject. I said to these guys, look, how are we going to understand why you have been treated so badly in this museum? Seems to me that is an important point. And as we tell this story, there are some really quite unpleasant images about your past. Do we want to show these? Is it our right to show these? Why are we showing these? How will it make you feel? How will it make other San people feel going into the museum? And I tried to put together an account of for me, it's a big thing. How could one human being treat another human being in this way? And it seems to me that's a story that we can tell. And by telling that story, it can be extremely valuable as a healing process for the Bushmen and as a healing process for people coming into. I mean, South Africa is such a complicated place. You know, everything you do is bound up with history, painful history. So issues like this are critical, and people walk into a museum with these issues always close to the surface. So I sat down in a room with 20-some people, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to have to show you something that tries to explain why people came to your country and treated you like this. And I thought, let's go back to the beginning. I tried to begin with this, to explain that there's this idea that, you know, evolution has led up to the clever white guy, but it's all collapsed. You know. But of course it didn't work at all. The only thing one of them said to me is, so this stuff about coming from apes, is that true? I mean, he literally said it like that. And it was so straightforward an approach that spoke of such a gap that I moved on quickly. But it was really powerful for me to realise, okay, we really have to chart our way through this. So I thought, well, let's think about people who were going there, what they had in their minds when they were arriving in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s and 1700s. So I started with the idea of the great chain of being. Because I thought if they had some sense of why people arrived and treated them like they did, from a historical perspective, it might help. So I talked them through the great chain of being, and then I said, but of course, you know, they're very aware that they were measured and they were photographed, and in the local museum in Cape Town there were dioramas of Bushmen. It became a huge political issue that there were Bushmen in there, and they were treated like stuffed people, and some of them claimed they were stuffed people. And it became such an issue that the Bushmen were removed, the dioramas were removed from the museum, and it was a national outcry. It became almost an international outcry. And it sort of fitted in with what was going on elsewhere in the world. And dioramas were pulled out of museums across the world. It became extremely unpolitically correct to have a diorama. So I was trying to get across to them, well, yes, but people in Europe, where these ships were coming from, in the periods that they were doing all this, they were doing similar things. They were looking at criminals, they were looking at mad people, they were measuring, and that's why they were doing it where you are. You're not so special in some ways. So I was showing them these pictures of pictures of the criminal, the insane. This is much later. The Germans getting in there and having a little bit too much to say. And then I was saying, and remember what they were thinking about when they were coming. These were amazing times. People were interested. They were really interested. Electricity, what is this stuff? 1700s, what is this stuff? So you tie a buoy with silk threads, and you have this strange machine, and you're not quite sure what it does, but it makes things happen, and you plug it in at one end of the buoy, and something happens at the other end of the buoy. So this is what they were doing. And these experiments were going in the 1700s, and obviously ran through to Faraday and his great cages. They were sticking people in and cranking them up, and they turn it on, and the hair goes up, and wow, you'd have auditoriums watching this stuff, full of people, probably just across the road. It was probably classic stuff going on. They were holding things up at light and spitting beams. So this spirit of inquiry, taking the blood from a man and sticking it into a human being to see if it works. Does it work? And these things were being done. The body, stripping the body, looking at it inside. How does this work? And it doesn't excuse what's going on, but it gives it a context for what's going on. The same way that they were sailing out to South Africa, they were looking up at the stars. And the sorts of ideas they had in their minds were received from medieval times, which had, obviously, classical precedents. And these sorts of images were still being trotted out in books in the 1500s, still probably in the 1600s. So it's not surprising that when people got there, they didn't approach this from a neutral perspective. So this is what happens later. Now these are pictures from obviously the early 20th century. Well, early to middle. Well, I think it's 1930. Is that 1932? Yeah. So I showed these. A lot of the people in the working group, they'd seen some of these pictures, and I said to them, "Look, do you want to show these sorts of pictures? Are these valuable?" And from the beginning, they said, "Yes, we want to tell our history. We must tell our story." So this is a picture from an expedition that went out, and this is a Bushman character. And this is how most people had it in mind. You know, very small people. This is a group of Bushmen that were rounded up. In fact, around where David Craper comes from, the Khmer Bushmen, and they were taken and they were shown in exhibitions around the world. You know, this was quite a big business, taking Bushmen around, sitting in circuses. And then, obviously, incarceration. A lot of Bushmen were incarcerated, one way or the other. And then, in the German colonial period in Namibia, this was a postcard that you could buy. So understanding how you can treat someone else like this seems to me extremely important. And the Bushmen are aware of this past. In everything that happens to them, it has this extraordinary history to it. So you have to be careful, little things you do and say. Coming in, certainly for me, as someone not brought up in southern Africa, the learning curve is enormous. It's enormous. Little things, the way you say, if you go in the morning and you say good morning in a particular way, it has resonances of big Afrikaner farmers coming in and, you know, because that's what happened to them when they were little. And you represent, well, I would represent quite a lot of that. So it's difficult. So I carried on with trying to sort of develop a perspective out of this. At the same time as people were being stuck in rooms and all their folklore being written about, they were being stuck in photographic studios and dressed up. They were being chained up, and they were being, again, stuck in more photographic studios. Now this was interesting. Obviously, the whole cranial head measuring thing, phrenology, books full of measurements of Bushman bones and sizes. But I showed this to them, and I said to them, so I thought in the museum, okay, how are we going to deal with these photos? If we stick them up, we should. Well, I said to them, what would you like to say about this picture? And one of the guys looked at me, and I said, what would you like to say about that picture? And he said, that Bushman is afraid. And that it just cut straight into me. Because I have to be really honest, that's not what I thought when I looked at it. You know, I was really intrigued. Is he really that small? He looks so quizzical. He even looks like Yoda from Star Wars or something. You know, whatever thoughts go into your head, and those are the thoughts that people will have in museums, in books, when they see this image. But I was slightly ashamed that I hadn't thought, you know, that man is afraid, and that's what it speaks now. And I mean, that's not photoshopped. That's an extraordinary statement of so many things. So yes, that was a circus act, picture from a circus act. Obviously, there's an industry about writing about these things in postmodernism. But then I thought, well, if our museum can take this story slightly wider, then that, again, seems to me like we could create a bit of a healing place of understanding for this. So I said, well, look, the insanity in North America, they've got photographic studios reenacting a scalping. I mean, that's pretty bizarre. So you have this whole thing going on, certainly in North America. Then you have...
Excuse me, in that scalping, who was the perpetrator of the scalping? Because we're told that it was a Native American thing, but actually I think it was white.
Yeah, but they're not worried about that. It's a photo.
I know, but I just wondered if you had an opinion on that, where they were coming from when they were showing this. Because it's quite controversial. So many people think it's the Native Americans.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to leap into that right now.
Right.
Even if I felt qualified, which I do. So, North American Indians. This is moving on to an exhibition that was done. It's a well-known exhibition that was done about the Bushmen in South Africa, and they showed some of the pictures of heads that have been real heads that were on display, and this is their way of dealing with it. It was a very controversial exhibition, and one of the things that was particularly upsetting about this exhibition was that they put stories about Bushmen on the floor. And people got very angry that you were walking over stories of your family being killed, of atrocities. It didn't seem right to be walking over these things. And then their way of dealing with these diorama casts, and these were taken from real body casts. And the big thing was that the dioramas of Bushmen that were in the museum in South Africa, they were done of Bushmen who weren't asked. That's the thing that's come out of it. It's critical they weren't asked. It's not even. Some of them liked going in there and saying, "That's my grandmother," and they could, but they weren't asked, and that's quite something to do to someone. So I was putting this in front of them, saying, "Look, these are ways you can do it, and these are ways you can not do it." Then branching out again, Australia. I mean, I find the similarity through these pictures just really potent. These are Australian Aboriginal communities, people. And this is a very famous picture there was a prison in Cape Town, the Breakwater Prison, and a very famous picture of Clan Bushmen who were, they later some of them became the people who Wilhelm Blake spoke to for his archive, but there they are sitting in chains. And this is Australia, around about the same time. I mean, it's irrelevant, but even the stonework, the whole thing just resonates of a way of doing things. And then in North America, I was speaking to people from Canada, in fact, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, about what was going on in native schools. And that's something that didn't happen in South Africa. I mean, when you see this amount of children, and they've all been forcibly removed from their parents, I mean, I wish I could remember precisely, but the guy who's heading the Truth and Reconciliation in Canada, he was telling me about a girls' school where they were investigating it, and I'm sure it was into the 90s, they had an electric chair they had built specially, I presume as a form of punishment. I mean, it's just, Canada is a frightening place. It was I couldn't swear on the 90s, but it was recent. If it wasn't the 90s, it was the 80s. But terrifyingly recent, and we like to think all this is way back.
Yeah, the native people got the vote very late in Canada. Yeah. It was in the 70s that they actually got the vote to their own.
But the flip side of this is that you then have a whole population, or populations and generations now in North America and Canada, of people who have gone through a Western education system and can now, they are very vocal spokespeople for their communities. So there's that whole sort of feedback, which there isn't in South Africa. We don't have people. There are now some Bushmen who are entering university, very, very, very few. I can name a handful. And they don't want to have anything to do with their past. They just want to forget it and move on. So there isn't this whole, if you're setting up a museum in North America or Canada, you have these people who will stand and say, what are you doing now? I'll tell you about this. And they've been at it for 50 years. And they're professors at Harvard and whatever. There's a completely different ballgame in some ways. Just finishing on, this is just shocking. Why that picture there was taken by the same person that took that picture there? There's only one reason you take a picture like that. It's confused agendas. A lot of this is just messy. And here we have an Australian Aboriginal, and here we have a very famous where he told stories about folklore. He was recorded by Wilhelm Blake. So just those contrasts. So I think that's probably, those are modern pictures of Ham people. They're Chimpanzee. So they're from Namibia. So we're actually having part of our museum is an exhibition being held by the Paul Weinberg, who took those pictures. This was the working group. So some of the people that I put these ideas to, we went around local museums looking at their history to see what they would make of it all. just to show, you know, the sort of people involved. So that's that one, and now if we move on to the last one. So, so this is the PowerPoint that I showed to the committee, if you like, that we're putting the museum together with. So we have, our job is to bring cultural restitution to the San. That's what khwa is all about. So how do we best achieve that? How can we do it in their voice when they have been so disempowered? And they're coming from another place. They're not coming through education systems that talk the same language. They're not coming through the same experiences. Very few of them have probably been to museums. They don't, you know, their idea of a museum, a lot of them have been to school, and their best ideas would be going to some, you know, tiny little museum somewhere that's a classic old-fashioned dusty thing, and it's all pretty dull. And so they say, yes, we'd love a museum, but what does that really mean? I'll just... Now, we got funding, first of all, from the Lottery Council in South Africa, so we had the equivalent of about £50,000. And they said that we had, by June, coming up, we had to have the concept and the content of this museum sorted out, which sounded very straightforward when the people applied for the money, but then we had to ask, you know, what does that mean? Does this mean we actually, how elaborate is this? Do we have to have a thorough story and start doing things, or just, you know, just little decisions like that have become very difficult. As it is, the lottery haven't paid out. They paid out some of it, but they're now 6 months late with the rest of it.
Why?
It's the way, unfortunately, things are going with a lot of bureaucracy in South Africa. Things are just struggling. They're really struggling. And you write letters and phone and everything, and it just gets pushed to one side. So I had to come up with a story. We've got to try and capture this thing in a story, so that people arrive there and there's something clear that they can pick up. And I thought the way that we can do this is actually build on the idea of a story. Now, amongst the Bushmen, in different languages, there are different versions of this word, kumi, and that's a clan word, and it means story, but story means the sort of story you might tell that might make someone laugh, something that happened to you. It could be what we might call folklore, it could be news, it could be conversation. So the point for their story is that it's not, they don't make the distinction between fact and fiction, story and news, because that relates to ideas of memorant knowledge, ideas that we don't look in books and have fixed knowledge about things. We value what comes from personal experience. So I will never tell you that you're wrong, because that's just how you are. And this fits into the whole idea of egalitarianism. Personal experience is critical. And people will stand around and they'll talk about things. If they're tracking an animal, they'll have long conversations about, well, the animal's coming from this way, and I think this, and the last time I did it, it was like this, and someone else will say, yes, but. So they have these conversations and it all comes out, but no one will turn around and say, no, you're wrong. Because there isn't that fixity of the authoritative word, the authoritative hierarchical structure. So the story allows us to tell something that we're not saying, this is absolutely how it is. Because we can't represent 113,000 people. You know, we can only represent the people that we talk to. We're trying to talk to as many people as possible. But of course it's impossible. And it's impossible trying to make everyone happy. Everybody's, you know, very vocal people with very strong ideas. Everyone's got their own ideas. No, you can't do this, you can't do that. So we'll get nowhere if we genuinely try and make this a completely libertarian process. So we thought, let's tell our story as khwa. And that will permit us to be as generous and as representative as we feel we can be practically, but give us the authority and the confidence to tell what these people around us want to tell.
What does khwa mean?
Oh yeah, sorry, it means rain, really. It sort of means rain, but it means water, and it has links with fertility, snakes, we're off then. Yep.
And that's a real old term.
That's a clan term. So it's just that I think all the different languages will have an equivalent, more or less, of it. So whether it's a deity, or whether it's the rain, is worthy of a few papers. So the other thing is they're really keen on past, present, and future. And obviously, someone in the past, when they've tried to set up this museum 2 times in the past, and it's failed for various reasons. Somewhere in the past, somebody said past, present, and future, and it's in fact, I realised what they were. The mantra that sort of came out from the Smithsonian Native American Indian Museum, and they have books called Past, Present, and Future. And I think it was voguish, but I think it's very it's appropriate. So when I sat down with them, they said, well, past, present, and future. How past? Well, we've got to go from the beginning. Okay, it's getting bigger. This. Where do we go? From the beginning to now. What do we do? Everything. So previous people trying to set up a museum and come up with loads of ideas. We can put this, and this in. I will put this to the group, and they say, yes, we'll do all that. Okay. So, negotiating our way through this is a tricky thing. So one of the things that came out is this extraordinary claim of being first people. That is an extraordinary claim. Now, for me, there's an awful lot of value in being inclusive in this story, as I've said about trying to explain how one human being could treat another like this in a colonial context. And this happens with first peoples around the world. And of course, lots of people are first peoples in one sense. In a genetic sense, which is a very specific argument, these people are first people. So making that distinction for them and for people visiting, I think is important as something we can build on as a sort of shared humanitarian way forward, and as something that counteracts something a little bit nasty that's going on around issues of identity and politics, which I'll come to. So we're going to keep the idea that they are first people as important. So we've got to try and empower them through this museum. We've got to try and bring dignity, equality, make real changes. Easy to say this stuff, very easy. Much harder to do it. And I am very keen that we take this museum to a place not just about the sand, but we build and work with the sand to a new place. So we have sand knowledge, and we have what we bring to it, and we don't just end up with the San talking amongst themselves, but broadening their conversations. So, those are just a few of the questions that came up. What do we actually need to tell this story? And then just there are funding issues. How much do we have to do before June? One of the things that also came out is some people said, look, we can use this, we can use that. We don't need to build a big building. We don't need to spend lots of money on this. So that seemed to be an ethos of the museum as well. Use what we've got. That's part of the Bushman way, being creative. So we're trying to incorporate that into it. And there's a big question for me was issues of land and environment. They were always talking about land. So in their minds, they were already thinking of this as a sort of environmental eco place. But for me, that wasn't something we should do automatically, because that's going back to old stereotypes in some ways of being of the bush. Let's only talk about you in terms of nature in that sort of very constructive fashion. But if you go up to the Kamani Bushmen and say, who are you? They'll very nakedly say, I'm nature's person. Because it's come back to them from anthropologists and students. Tell me, and I've took some guys out, oh boy. One was a filmmaker, and we had this old hunter in front of us, and it was, I'd done it myself, I suppose, 15 years ago or something, and he was saying, okay, tell me how you find an animal. Tell me if I've told this story before. How do you find an animal? So the bloke's standing there, we were all about to go hunting, he's got his bow, and said, you feel it, don't you? You feel it, don't you? When you're going through, you feel it. Could you show me how you feel it? The guy's standing there like this. And I just, I know where they are. I follow them. No, show me how you go through the bush. And you feel it inside you and your heart's beating. And you feel like the antelope. And you walk like the antelope. And you feel the sweat dripping down your back like the antelope. Because these are the stories that came out from the time Bushmen. And this stuff was built up into presentiments. You feel where the animal are, and you've got the animal inside you. For me, the way I understand these things is, you're walking through the bush and a lion roars, and you go, whoa! Bloody hell, what was that? Something happens inside you. Your hackles rise. You can call them presentiments. You can, and this has amongst the Bushmen, there's a very social context for talking about what happens and how you calm down the body afterwards. But let's not get carried away. I said a couple of things to a couple of hunters that brought me up short. One was, what makes a good hunter? And I've been reading all the material, when I was starting out. I was expecting, all that sort of stuff. And he looked at me and he said, when you're hungry. I mean, God, if that's not the truth. And that was another bolt to the brain. And the other one was, I said, how do you find an animal when you can't see it? And I was expecting, you can feel it inside you and it's over the hill. And he said, well, you can follow the tracks. Yes, you can, yeah. And that's spot on. And I sort of went a bit further. Yes, I know where they are at this time of day. They'll be over the hill over there. And there is a huge environmental knowledge that could come out and is there. And it really is extraordinarily impressive. But it's not quite this sort of thing.
Chris, have you heard that animals about to be killed will come to the hunter and put their head down and wait to have their throat cut?
I've never read one.
Where?
There are Thackeray's written about inquisitive behaviour of animals, and the idea that certain Bushmen who have the springbok inside them, they go hunting, and the animals come towards them. And I think he's got it right, really. See, in ham terms, they would say, that happens. I know that happens. When I go out hunting, that does happen. It's something about what happens when I go hunting, so it's something in me. It's a relationship in me, and it's something special to me, maybe. I haven't seen it with other people. That's one way of thinking about it. The other way is, something slightly magical happening in between. I think it's a sort of inquisitive behaviour of animals coming towards.
I saw a television programme about the Bushmen, and they were hunting this big animal with big horns on him. It shows the biggest animals with the biggest horns on, because it would get tired if you kept it moving in the sun. And they hunted it down by exhaustion, and they had this, they were marathon runners basically. Is there any truth in this? Is that how they hunt?
Yeah, it's been a big thing.
Yeah.
Louis Liebenberg came out. This guy, Louis Liebenberg, stayed with Bushmen, a whole group in Botswana. And he now runs a big tracking school, influential figure. He wrote about his experience running down an animal. And the reality is it's not that hard to run down an eland, typically, when it's hot. And they go hunting in the heat of the day. And the animals get really tired. I mean, it's hard. I'm not saying I can do it. But yes, it does happen. But it's become a really big thing in the whole marathon, endurance, barefoot running community. It keeps being sprouted in articles and it has a lot of currency. So anyway, I'll just flag a few of the problems that we've got. Awful lot of detail. We can have such a variety of people coming through to this place because the museum is only 70 kilometres north of Cape Town. So it's a long way from a lot of these communities. And that's partly because I think the founders wanted it to be accessible so that people could come up and meet the San, and the San have access to Cape Town and for entrepreneurial reasons and so forth. But it means that we should be able to cope with some people coming through who maybe certainly the elderly will be illiterate. They'll probably have difficulty seeing, maybe difficulty hearing, and we're trying to represent their stories. And then we'll have anything through to academics coming through wanting to pick holes in it, which is inevitable. And then very politically sensitive government people coming through, other representative groups, people wanting to claim land on the back of maybe what we're doing in the museum or whatever claims we're making. So we've got to pitch things at many different levels.
Chris, how about the spiritual? Are you going to be doing any ceremonies there? Is that projected into the plans? That the native people will come there and
we've talked a lot about. There's a lot of living museums and things that do healing dances and so forth, and we've talked a lot about whether people want to do things like that. They say yes, if people want to do it, they can do it. If there are Bushmen who want to do it, they can do it. It's very difficult, and I'll come to that in a moment.
I just wonder if you know about the Sami people, because they have a museum that they're actually building. I went to it a few years ago, the first time it was presented to the public, and that's what they particularly do.
If you could tell me about that later, that'd be great. I'd love to know anything about any museum advice where you've been to. That'd be great. So this is when I talk to some communities. This is what they say to me: the museum. It's a long story. If you're going to do it, or forget it. And if you're going to do it, get it right. You've got to get our history right. Get this story right. So how do we get it? How do we get it right? These are the things that we want to achieve: restitution, respect. We want to be edgy, but not too edgy. It's not a psalm thing to really make people feel terribly uncomfortable. Just a few of the things we said. People should be inquisitive on their driving home, ask questions. But the key thing, and this is what comes out of reading a lot of museum literature and about the whole, what we're trying to do, is you haven't got feeling in there, you've got nothing. If you haven't got feeling for the psalm people, they won't relate to it. And it's all very well putting up blocks of text, whatever we do, even interactive things, but if they can't relate to it, they'll walk through it in 5 minutes, and what's it got to do with me? And that would be quite a destructive thing. It won't only be not achieving what we want, it could be, well, this is another project that comes in and wants to say something about us, another failed project. And there are so many failed projects. The money that has gone into the Bushmen it's terrifying. I mean, millions and millions. And you can go up to South Africa, North South Africa, and pretty much every time you go up, there'll be a new project building, and everyone's got the new project. You go back a few months later, and it's empty.
Is it because it's not the San themselves are doing this, but outsiders are not really understanding what is actually happening and how to present it? Because one of the things I'm seeing here is the potential for problem is a Western perspective is very explicit, and non-Western, that sort of a tradition, is more implicit. And it's how you get across that implicitness of it. This is probably why, there's this clash of of cultures.
Yes, and but when you have situations where, for me, sitting down in front of them, I say, okay, let's talk about this. What should we do with this museum? Nothing. What about? So it's all the time. What about this? What about this? And it's incredibly difficult. I've talked to Roger Chennels, who's been a lawyer working all the big land claims with the Kalahari Bushmen, and I was really troubled by this. And he said, look, we just have to live with it. There's nothing else you can do. You have to start small, and there's always that sense of, am I saying too much? Am I putting ideas in your head?
Sorry, Chris. Another thing that's just struck me is not so much as what you said. I think this culture is a living culture. It's not a written culture, not like a Western thing. And you're right when you started about the museum. Is the museum correct in a way to represent people? It's because it's a living. It's a feeling living rather than a.
Yeah. No, I'll show you. So these are a few of the ideas that we were running through, running it a little bit short of time, so
Well, that's the point. It's best to keep the questions for later and then let's finish before, because otherwise...
so we have
10 minutes. Yeah.
we have this agenda, which the lawyer was the man who said to me, "No, this has got to be a healing place. There's nowhere where people can reflect and really recognise what's been going on here." And there is a possibility, it occurred to me, maybe we should have some sort of monument, some sort of memorial monument. Even there are books written that explicitly claim genocide of the San, based on there were, particularly in the 19th century, there were groups of Afrikaner farmers, typically, who would go out and just slaughter Bushmen. It was somewhere between sport and utilitarian protection of stock. I mean, it was horrific. And these were very organised things, where the word obviously commando comes from. So there's a terrible past there. You saw some of the pictures. So maybe we need a place where you can just come and you can just hear a little bit and just reflect. The bottom line is that's how much money we thought we need, which equates with a really good exchange rate at the moment to just over £1 million. So it's not huge in relative terms. And our plan is to produce, we haven't got money to do the whole museum, so we're going to take one of the buildings and we're going to produce a prospectus, and we're going to put an exhibition inside it so that we can use that as a place for the guides. We have guides that take tourists around, they can talk to them about it, we can take fundraisers there. And also I can plot out what we're doing around it and hopefully try and make the story work. So that's at the phase I'm at the moment. I'm sort of writing all the different themes, or getting all experts for all the different themes. That's what we decided. We need more involvement of some people. Right. We've only got 5 minutes.
You've got 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Just take your time, because otherwise...
Right, so what we decided is restitution. Cultural restitution. How do we really give anything back? Well, we can't give anything back. What can you give back? Money? Land? You can't. It doesn't mean anything. If you give the land back, it doesn't work. You can't give land back. Land is not some sort of stationary thing that keeps all its social relations, all its environmental relations. So you can give back. There was the largest land claim in Africa, the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, and the Bushmen won it, and they got the land back. And a number of times I've gone up to that park with Bushmen, a Land Rover full of Bushmen. We turn up and we're not allowed in. They say, no, you've got to sign. You've got to send us all the names of all the people that are coming 2 weeks in advance. Then you can come in. And these guys that say, well, yes, but it's our park. No. You've got rights to this park, those sorts of rights. Then you've got a different set of rights to this part of the park. And we gave you the farms outside the park where you can live. And they do live on the farms. But where the game is, where they can see the tracks, where they can pick the wild foods, it's in the park. But they're not really allowed into the park. If you push it, yes, you can go into the park. And there are lots of arguments why you shouldn't let them in and so forth. But it doesn't. They all say yes, we'd love to go and live in the park, but I think it's a nonsense. They can't, and they wouldn't want to. They can't survive because the park doesn't work like it ever worked, and most of them don't really know how it worked because they've been herding goats with people for 100 years up in that part of the world. There's been white farms since the late 1800s. So we're talking at least a couple of generations back here. So I'm thinking, what can we give back? Well, there's so much written about the Bushmen, and it's all over the world. It's in the Smithsonian, it's in the Pitt Rivers Museum, it's in the British Library. If we can make that accessible somehow and relevant, that would be a huge achievement. It's in Cape Town Museum, it's in Wits universities. So creating an archive or a portal where we can join all this intellectual information together and somehow pull it into communities for community use at the same time as I think it's high time communities, if they want to research, if they want to preserve their history, create films, create books, educational material, whatever. It's high time they did it themselves. So if we can mobilise them to do it themselves, somehow by making local archives where they can decide exactly what they want to do, how they're going to do it, and who has access to that material, then that would be a great thing. And maybe we could pull these two sort of archives together. And Khwa could be the hub where this happens. And this is what I'm working on at the moment. So there's this whole series of institutions that I'm hoping to agree to have this cooperating portal. People don't cooperate. That's the other staggering factor. I went to WITS, big department, rock art department, very significant in the Bushman world globally. I went and told them about the museum, and it was, as far as I could see, it was the first time anyone had gone to tell them about anything outside of their own university. The people are just like this, it's you get factions and it's complicated. So it's a political minefield out there, and people don't cooperate. Yet there's all this information. So if we can make it, I mean, even if there are programs coming out of Australia, and there's some amazing programs, content management systems for museums, for communities, where communities can bring their material into the local school or library or whatever, and scan the material, stick pictures in there of their family, and in a lot of these communities, sadly, a lot of people die pretty young, and all of a sudden you're left without your parents or whatever. If you can make this as a sort of community memory book, just for the community to look at, that would be an amazing thing. Anyone can go in, they can annotate it, they can write their stories, hopefully you can give them cameras and so forth, and then just let them flesh out that archive. And this has happened in Australia, and it's been very successful. People love to do it. And then, as education takes things different ways, they can do what they want. They can make books, films, hopefully. So that's in the pipeline. Now we come to the actual site of the museum, 850 hectares north of Cape Town. So it's split into, I split it into the buildings that are there and the gate. The gate is a really important thing coming up to this place, and that's something I never thought. We're really stuck on what to do at the gate. It seems so straightforward, what's a gate? But what do you do at the gate? Our mission is to get people in there to change the life of someone, but if they don't stop, it's useless. But then if we set ourselves down the street, if we've got fluorescent Bushmen doing this or something, and we're selling, I don't know, that's going too far the other way. That's negating exactly what we're trying to achieve. So this is, it's a little bit hard to see in this light. That's the main, it's by a main road heading north. You drive up this long drive, then there's this clump of buildings here, and there's a lovely hill here. It's an amazing site, looking over the sea. It's an old wheat farm. So those are the buildings, so that you drive up the road there, there's a car park there, and you come in, and I thought it'd be good to have a circuit going round. And they want it from the beginning, so we're starting at the beginning, and then we're going to move through, and then we're going to build a new building here, which will hopefully explore what it is that's different about their relationships with the world. So I'm thinking of the whole site as somewhere that's environmentally relevant. Land is extremely important to them. There's something in this about what would have happened if people hadn't arrived, if those ships hadn't arrived. Where would their way of living have gone? It sort of makes us reflect on what they do that's different. So, thinking of them as situated people as opposed to different people. Low impact livers, like there are low impact livers around the world. And if we can take the knowledge that they have, not take it, but if they can take their knowledge, and they can join with the best of what we have to share, then hopefully we can move towards something new. I mean, looks a little bit crass, but that's where we're heading. So the gate, what to do at the gate? We've come through all sorts of ideas about something dramatic, something symbolic, something iconic. Of course, we ask some of the elderly Bushmen, and they say, well, stand by the road and we can sell our craft. and we can wear our skins. When the cars come, we can rush out and we can dance, which is what they do. It's what they do up in the Kalahari, it's what they do everywhere. And if we're really representing them, if that's what they want to do we do it? We're not going to do it.
Are you going to charge people? That's a big issue.
That's a very big issue. Yeah, it's a very big issue. So these are sort of iconic statues. These are some statues that are done by Australian Aboriginal artists. Now, I don't know of any Bushman artists who have worked at this sort of scale or anything. If we could use someone to make their own iconic statue, maybe that's a possibility. But I was thinking, let's break the mould altogether. Let's turn them into what you don't expect. Someone just like you, who's interested in doing something. Make this place a little bit snappy, and it just so happens that it's a little bit of a backwater, so getting good coffee is a problem. So maybe we do just have something like a coffee machine, and we, as part of our museum, we open it up into our education program, and we have an entrepreneurial program that trains people into being barristers. There's something about being international, mixing coffee from around the world.
So baristas, not
baristas.
baristas.
Oh, yes,
I'm confused.
You're absolutely right there. Barristers would be good.
Might be helpful.
They can make their own
barista training. Sorry, yes. I did come across a whole barista training school as well, which is just there. So the idea is going around.
What about the snakes?
Barristers on the brain. Snake, yeah, well that was one of the guys suggested that. Snake parks. Yeah. He said people stop when there's a snake park. So, but we could have mobile pop-ups, whatever way you want to go. So anyway, you arrive at khwa. Now my idea is, it's all about going back to what you were saying about different way of different kinds of knowledge. Now this is all about feeling to me. So what I want to happen is to try and make people come to a different relationship with the world. Excuse me. I want to try and capture what it is that we've said is simple and primitive, and just really think about this. Is it really this stuff has people survived doing this in the most extraordinary climates, and they've been doing it for thousands of years. There's nothing simple about this. I mean, obviously anthropologists know that when you get into the kinship or the social structures, whatever, it gets extremely complicated. There's nothing old about it. So jogging people into this different state of awareness. When they arrive in the car park, I want them to sort of walk through to an introductory building, but there to be little signals in there. Just little things you may or may not notice, but you think, oh, that's a little bit strange. When you walk through, why are there footprints? Is that something looking at me? Is that not something looking at me? What's that smell? Start getting in touch with these things that are absolutely crucial in the Bushman world. Smell and wind, fire, water. Critical when you're out there. Maybe you walk through a Bushman hut to get through to the entrance building. So we're going to put an entrance, a sort of introductory entrance building there. Then we move through to a building with archaeology and creation stories. That's the plan. One of the little things I was thinking, maybe when you come in, you meet someone and they've got instead of a normal table, you've got a table covered in sand, and you say, look, I've got 10 minutes, what can I do? And they say, well, look, you could go here or here. Oh, I've got half an hour, well, you can go here or here or here. And they just wipe it clean and then just do it again. So they're drawing maps in the sand, they're communicating with you through the sand, which is a very Bushman way of communicating. Not only literally, because they'll just do that the whole time. Well, yes. Or at the same time, there's a sense of knowledge. It's not to be stuck down onto pages. It disappears. It's gone. So there's a different relationship with knowledge. So we're going to have a few basic facts about the Bushmen. So if you come for 10 minutes, you pick up the facts, show a film, really highlight that they are first people like first people, and be a little bit provocative. First people are allowed to be people like the rest of us. There are all sorts of people out there. So that's what we're dealing with.
And there's all kinds of first people.
Precisely. So this is our first building that we're going to work with. So they're lovely buildings, a beautiful place. And we're going to have the.
Who owns the buildings?
It was bought by a Swiss lady, and so it's part owned by Windsor, the working group for indigenous minorities in Britain, plus this Swiss lady.
So you do have the buildings in effect. Are yours?
Yes. Yeah. We have the whole.
So in a way, it's totally eclectic. With the first people from all over the world can come and be involved.
Well, that would be the ideal. So creation stories, they said they want to start from the beginning. That said to me, start from creation stories, their beginning. So we're going to try and collect new creation stories and have them telling it either through video or we'll represent them in different ways, have pictures that tell creation stories or clothing, anything we can bounce off. And then from creation stories, I thought we should tell another story about how people came here. So maybe we tell a Bible story, because the Bible is obviously very significant, or we then move into science, the story of science. So it takes the idea of story going through. And then we lead through into DNA. Now DNA is important, as I suggested earlier, because people are now turning up and they're saying, I've got the L1 gene. I am a Khoisan person. Let's claim South Africa for ourselves. And this is the way it's heading. They're putting in a land claim for the whole of South Africa. The Khoisan People's Organisation. And only people who have got the L1 gene are allowed to join the party. So it's going a little bit crazy. So fleshing out ideas of identity, what's it really telling you to have this gene? Is that really who you are? Are people without the gene really not Bushmen? Is that fair? Let's open this up. And then the area where the museum is, amazing area, there's footprints, 117,000 years old. There's the origins of symbolism within, 10 miles and 100 miles, some of the most significant sites in the world. So we can build on those. That would be tremendous. Rock art is going to be an important thing. I thought everyone's done rock art though, so maybe we could focus on something special. We could focus on honey. I like honey and bees, because then we can sell mead, and honey is a big thing. And some of the elderly sons said, yes, honey beer. That's a very very Bushman thing. They volunteered that before I mentioned honey. We had beehives, so I thought possibilities. Rock art. Also, we could say, yeah, this rock art thing. What about this? Oh, this is from Australia, but it looks so similar. Why? Just try and play with things. Maybe hands. Why do people put their handprints on something? Maybe we can get everyone to put their handprint that comes. So just play around with a few of the ideas. Then it occurred to me that as we move out of that building to the next building, we're actually in the site where a lot of the people landed in their boats. The first people. That's pretty amazing. So we could build a ship for children to play on, but they could look out and they could see it, and they could pretend to be the person standing watching them coming, or pretend to be the person in the ship watching them coming. What would they say to each other? What did they say to the first white people that came? And what happened the other way around? The white people probably said, you're really smelly and you've got no clothes on. And the Bushmen probably said, you're really smelly and you've got these funny things hanging on you. So smell is a really important thing. Fat comes up the whole time. They would wear all kinds of fat and they're really smelly. They wouldn't wear fish oil. That was the only thing. They said a lot of things like that. So I'll just keep moving around. I wondered if we could explore how to move from a traditional Bushman hut into a government building, but how to make it an eco-sensitive environment. This building here struck me that there's a building and it's a classic colonial building. This is an extraordinary opportunity because this is the sort of building that actually destroyed the life of the Sun. It's a farm building, everyone will come probably and think, what a beautiful building. But if we can get them coming up to it, and all of a sudden there's a jam jar sitting on a ledge. Why is the jam jar there? Oh, that's for the Bushmen to drink out of, because they're not allowed to drink out of cups. They're not people. There's a doormat, Rekabstan Kraper, the father of David Kraper. He had to sleep on the doormat outside the farmhouse. He had to collect the mail by running through the night, 10, 20, 30 miles to go and collect the mail and bring it back the next morning. These were brutal places. So if we can take people into a place and they think, oh, this is all very familiar, then we say, hang on. And why is it so full of stuff? We could stick it full of everything that 19th century farmers collected around them to survive in this environment. And then suddenly realise, well, hang on, there were people here who didn't have any of this. The catalogues are open, shipping your stuff out from Europe or whatever. It's a crazy distance going on. And then dissolve the building as we come through. Somehow we've got to take people out of the building. So maybe we can start dismantling the walls, bring light in, take them into the outside environment, and tell a story of hope. The second half of the building is all about what the Bushmen have achieved, and hope, reconciliation, language projects, exciting things. Intellectual property rights, will grow the plants that are so critical. And this is really the last bit. The building. Now this is the building where we really say, okay, what's all this about? And I thought a lot about how to do this. And I wondered whether you walk into the building and you have something like an ostrich and a bush and a couple of sticks or whatever, and say, could you survive with this? And maybe a little drip of water comes out every 10 minutes. And it seems very straightforward, but could you survive with this? And the answer is probably no. And of course, it's not a problem if that's how you've grown up. But it just reminds us that nature provides everything we need to survive. It can't do anything else, of course. But in this form, it's not even reconstituted. So it takes enormous knowledge. That's the key. It takes enormous knowledge to do that. And somehow we've got to bring this knowledge out as you go through different sections that will change over time. So whether they're hunting sections, seasonality, fire, really big thing, making fire. We can get people making fire. I'm sure people here are trying to make fire. And it becomes a rite of passage.
Rite of passage.
Well, it's used in survival schools. Making fire is a big thing. And I don't know if you've done it, but it does. There's this feeling, I've done it. And you can see, and it's like an epiphany. Because all of a sudden, this thing just happens in front of you. If you get it wrong, if you get upset and angry, this thing's not going to work. You've got to be really calm about it. You've got to, I wrote a little bit about this, about doing it nicely. Bringing all your focus of attention to it. The word nicely crops up right the way through the literature. But it means an awful lot. It means an awful lot. So this is the sort of buildings maybe we can put these things in. Somehow a building that isn't a building, start dissolving the museum, start dissolving these relationships with buildings and space.
Fascinating.
And then I wondered about butterflies. No one else liked the idea. I really like the idea because butterflies are a symbol of life. Fertility, water when they come out. And you can drive through clouds of butterflies, literally clouds of butterflies. Beautiful.
It can be a symbol of death as well.
They could be.
In Auschwitz and so on, apparently children drew butterflies inside the places where they went on to the next life.
So the last thing, there's a hill, and we're going to do something special on the hill. We're not sure yet. It's a beautiful place. There's nothing up there, so somehow introduce people to the idea of this could be home as well. It's a sort of building that's not a building. It's something to wake you up. Maybe this is where you go in and it's a very dark space and you're sitting there and then a huge lion roar comes up behind you. Something that your body just gets this. And then you question.
Real lions.
Well, what? Or maybe it's an ostrich. An ostrich sounds incredibly similar to a lion. And you could do an ostrich or a lion. Is this an ostrich or a lion coming? Things like that. The sounds the Bushmen know in the night. Are these the sounds? What are the sounds that are in the night? What are the sounds that you know? Are these sounds still in the Kalahari? Compare the sounds or something. Or maybe have a little bit of water that just drips, a tiny bit of water. And that's to say, okay, this is your water for a week, a month.
And the art of carrying that water if you want to take it somewhere.
That's the thing. There's all sorts of these little things we can pick up on. So the last thing is that there's a medicine area. We have to have a medicinal plant area. Porcupine is a great medicine animal. Maybe we have a porcupine trail. footprints going off through it. And so that's it really. Then you sort of end up in, like everywhere, you end up in the shop.